Supporting the families of fallen officers, the message a big donation is sending to their loved ones. KPBS Evening Edition starts right now. Good evening and thanks for joining us. I'm Ebony Monet. Measure N on San Diego's November ballot would place a 5% tax on sales of recreational marijuana. That is, if California voters choose to legalize it. KPBS Metro reporter Andrew Bowen explains what that money would pay for.
The city estimates Measure N could bring in some $22 million in its first year. The measure's architect, City Councilman Mark Kersey, says that's meant to pay for the local impacts of legalization, things like more city staff and police to make sure pot shops are complying with the law. The thing about legal weed, he says, is it's very new and unpredictable.
Just trying to be proactive on this. We don't want to all of a sudden see all these costs and then have to figure out how we're going to handle them. You know, it's really a situation of trying to be prudent, proactive, getting out ahead of this before it becomes a real problem for the city.
The state will be collecting a cultivation tax plus a special 15% excise tax on pot sales under Proposition 64, and local governments can apply for some of that money to offset the cost of legalization. But Kersey says this kind of system that forces cities to compete with each other hasn't favored San Diego in the past.
I don't anticipate we're going to see a whole lot of that money. I mean, maybe we'll get some of it, but I don't think it's going to be very much. And it's just not, I don't think, going to be anywhere close to what we need to actually cover the city's costs.
Now, if the costs of legalization aren't as high as expected, money from Measure N could be used to pay for things like libraries or road repair. But Kersey says the point of the measure is to ensure the city is well prepared for legalized marijuana. Andrew Bowen, KPBS News.
Today, more support for the family of fallen San Diego police officers. Mayor Kevin Faulkner and Police Chief Shelley Zimmerman were there to receive the $50,000. Viejas Casino officials say the donation to the San Diego Police Officers Association is part of its ongoing community support. SDPOA leaders say the money will serve a dual purpose. It will help the families of fallen officers, and it will financially help severely injured officers and their families if their injuries keep them from working. SDPOA leaders say getting this type of support sends a good message to officers and the community.
I think it's vitally important because, you know, if you look at the national dialogue on law enforcement, a lot of the stuff that's being put out there is a lot of negative aspects in the way law enforcement's handling and working with the community. But the reality is law enforcement does a lot of great work in the community. So to have a business and an organization or Viejas to do this for us sends a positive message that, you know what, we are trying to connect with the community.
The San Diego Police Officers Association's Widows and Orphans Fund was also used to help the families of Officer Jonathan de Guzman and Officer Wade Irwin. San Diego's Scripps Health System and Houston's MD Anderson are joining forces to help combat cancer. Executives from both organizations, along with city leaders, gathered this morning at Scripps for a contract signing ceremony. KPBS reporter Susan Murphy was there and has a report from La Jolla.
The goal of the partnership between Scripps Health and MD Anderson is to give cancer patients in San Diego and Southern California better access to the most advanced oncology care. Scripps Health President and CEO Chris Van Gorder says that includes extensive research and more clinical trials.
It's about working shoulder to shoulder with the brightest minds in the field at MD Anderson. And perhaps most of all, the vision is all about doing everything in our power to eradicate this cruel and complex set of diseases that we call cancer today.
The Scripps MD Anderson Cancer Center will be overseen by physicians and leaders from both organizations. Ronald DePino is president of MD Anderson. He says every patient will have a personalized treatment plan created by a team of specialists.
An oncologist, a surgeon, radiation therapist, diagnostician, imaging experts who are brought to bear on that individual so that that diagnosis is accurate, so that the optimized regimen for that patient in a highly personalized way is delivered.
More than 170,000 people in California are expected to be diagnosed with cancer this year. The partnership will focus on prevention, early detection, and saving lives. Reporting from Scripps Health in La Jolla, I'm Susan Murphy for KPBS News.
The Federal Aviation Administration released safety rules today and opened up the skies for commercial drones. The new rules include keeping the drones within sight and away from people, limiting the hours when drones can be flown and how fast and how high. Commercial operators initially complained the rules would be too rigid, but the agency is granting exemptions to some of the rules for companies that can show they can safely operate the drones. The FAA estimates 600,000 commercial drones will be operating in the U.S. within the year. Things got back to normal at the Los Angeles International Airport today after false reports of a gunman opening fire Sunday night caused panicked evacuations. Flights to and from the airport saw major delays. LA police say after a search of the terminals, they found no evidence that any shots were fired. The incident stirred chaos as hundreds of people rushed from the terminals onto the sidewalks or tarmac.
It was chaotic. We were coming in from Dallas and we got off the plane and were exiting and saw just a mob, a crowd running towards us. And we immediately started running, went through an emergency exit that was close to a gate, ran down onto the runway and got behind a catering vehicle. So that's all we could think about doing is just getting safe and getting out of there.
Airport officials say that a person wearing a Zorro costume was detained during the incident, but it's not clear whether that person had any connection to the evacuations. Just 2 weeks ago, a similar false alarm caused panic and evacuations at New York's Kennedy Airport. In Italy, 2 more bodies were pulled from the rubble of last week's earthquake, bringing the total number of dead to 292. Heavily damaged buildings were being demolished to ensure the safety of workers in the recovery and cleanup effort. Government officials planned to hold a state funeral at the airport hangar 40 miles away from the damaged area, but many angry residents complained. The funeral is now being scheduled for tomorrow at Amatrice. A restaurant in San Diego's Little Italy is sending help to the cleanup efforts, dish inspired by the town with the most damage and deaths from the earthquake. And all the proceeds of the sales will go to help those affected.
This dish is originally from the town of Amatrice, so where the quake epicenter was. And it's made of very simple ingredients, pork jowl, tomato sauce, and pecorino cheese.
The dish costs $16 and the fundraiser will continue for 2 weeks. Well, one of the state's most destructive fires that put 82,000 people under evacuation orders is now nearly out. The Blue Cut Fire in San Bernardino County. Ingrid Lobet of our media partner iNews Source has this week's news and numbers on the potential for burn in San Diego County.
More than half the land in San Diego County is at high or very high potential for difficult to control wildfire. That includes neighborhoods reaching almost to the sea and densely settled foothill cities. The U.S. Forest Service created this map. Even for those who know plenty about defensible space and brush clearing, this map is sobering. Almost a quarter of all terrain in the county falls into the highest hazard potential category, colored red on the map. That includes the area west of Interstate 15 near Escondido, Peñasquitos Canyon, Mission Trails, much of Santee, the lands of the Sequan Band of the Kumeyaay Nation, Brown Field, and Lower Otay Mesa. Much of the vast arc of land between Fallbrook and Borrego Springs is also red. Devastating fires struck the San Diego area in 2007. 500,000 people from Oceanside to Chula Vista were asked to evacuate. Now climate change is escalating conditions that were already too favorable for fire. I'm Ingrid Lobet for KPBS partner iNews Source.
The first in a series of low-cost monitors will track the air quality in San Ysidro for a cross-border study. KPBS's Maya Trabosi has more.
More than 50,000 vehicles pass through the San Ysidro port of entry each day. Now, air quality changes will be tracked with environmental monitors to study the impact on the surrounding communities. A spokesman for the Environmental Protection Agency says border communities are impacted by pollution sources from both sides of the California-Mexico border. A group of San Ysidro residents will be trained to manage the monitors and examine the data alongside scientists from San Diego State University and the University of Washington. This will be the first of 13 air monitors in the network. The rest are expected to be in place by October 1st. Maya Trabulsi, KPBS News.
America plans to move away from coal-fired power plants to renewable energy. The country plans to build more commercial wind farms. But the nation's first commercial wind farms are nearing retirement, and there are a few requirements to taking them down. In tonight's Insider Energy Report, Lee Patterson looks at who is responsible for taking down the giant turbines.
Anybody from Wyoming will tell you the wind here is almost always blowing. But today, a familiar landmark along the Colorado-Wyoming border is still. The Ponaquin Wind Farm has been shut down and decommissioned by its operator, Xcel Energy.
It was no longer in the best interest of our customers to keep operating it. Really, they're two separate issues. The Ponaquin Wind Farm is nearly 20 years old. It is relatively small in size. It did not make sense to keep investing in the operations of that facility.
The average lifespan of a wind turbine is about 20 to 25 years. But with maintenance and equipment and upgrades, a turbine could last up to 40 years. These 44 turbines have been around for 18 years and had a capacity to generate 750 kilowatts of electricity each. But technology has changed. The average wind turbine built today generates twice that or more. Jonathan Naughton directs the Wind Energy Research Center at the University of Wyoming. He says the decision to decommission comes down to economics.
A 15-year-old wind farm is on the verge of where that business decision could be made to shut it down. Now, hopefully in many cases they would choose to repower, put in new turbines in place if the wind farm is amenable to that.
But these turbines won't be replaced because in order for large operators like Xcel to invest, wind farms need to be bigger in order to be profitable. So the Ponaquin site will come down. And bison rancher Ron Thiel wants to make sure it's cleaned up the right way.
All the disruption of grass, which means roads, concrete, chain link fences, towers, they need to be gone so that we're back to square one, which is how they received the property.
Thiel owns and leases some of the property where Ponaquin was built in Wyoming and Colorado. Xcel says it's committed to eliminating any trace of the wind farm once it comes down. But when a wind farm needs to be cleaned up, it's tricky because there's no one set of rules. Instead, it's a combination of federal guidelines, sometimes state regulations, sometimes private agreements. It all raises questions about the long-term environmental impacts of these farms. Nationwide, there are around 49,000 wind turbines and at least 2,700 that have been decommissioned since America's first wind energy boom in the 1970s. Most of these retired turbines are in Southern California. The Tehachapi Wind Farm sits on the edge of the Mojave Desert. It was built during that initial wind energy boom decades ago. But many of the older turbines are no longer working, like skeletons standing on the desert hillside, slowly decaying. Back then, there was very little regulation.
When they were built in the mid to late 70s, they didn't have a lot of permitting issues about who was going to take them down or who was going to recover the sites after they were done producing power. When the bottom fell out of the market, most of the companies that produced the wind turbines went bankrupt.
The broken down past serves as a reminder of the need for an adequate cleanup plan today. Even though the Ponaquin site spans 2 states, the turbines themselves are in Colorado and subject to a patchwork of state and local regulations. But here in Wyoming, regulators say they saw the future coming and put rules on the books a full year before the federal guidelines came out. In Wyoming, wind energy producers are required to put up bonds to cover the cost of taking down turbines and returning the land to the way it was. Outside of Rawlins, Wyoming, construction is scheduled to begin late this year on the largest planned wind farm in North America. The Chokecherry and Sierra Madre Wind Project will populate these remote bluffs with giant next-generation wind turbines, generating enough electricity for around 3 million homes. Like Ponaquin, this massive wind farm will span government and private land. Here, the Bureau of Land Management has taken the lead.
The surface is our jurisdiction, and that means all elements of the habitat, the soils, the vegetation. So when it comes to what we require to be put back, I think is pretty comprehensive.
The federal BLM is also working side by side with the Wyoming Department of Environmental Quality to oversee the project. Now, bonding is required for the full amount of decommissioning and reclamation.
So if somebody did walk away, we do have security in place to close that facility out. All that is spelled out up front before the project even begins construction.
The State of Wyoming BLM partnership may set a new blueprint on how wind farms are managed and eventually decommissioned. But to date, there are no binding federal regulations in place.
I think, yes, we need to have a consortium that is willing to discuss these things and understand they all come with different perspectives, but in a way that it's economic to develop wind plants moving forward.
As for the Poniquin Wind Farm, Xcel's plan is to blow up the towers this fall and then disassemble the blades. Some of the structure will be recycled as scrap, and the rest will end up in a landfill.
You have to realize with renewable energy, it's not free from impacts.
For Inside Energy, I'm Lee Patterson.
This Inside Energy report was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Mild weather across much of San Diego with a heat wave bringing high temps inland. Larissa Abreu has the forecast.
Happy Monday, and thanks so much for joining me here today. Conditions continue very warm across SoCal, and short term we will continue with these very warm temperatures, especially LA. Highs today climb to the upper 80s, flirting with the 90s. Out in San Diego we had lower 80s, but nonetheless this is warmer compared to what we're used to for this time of the year. Here's a look at satellite and radar. We really don't have much going on across California. Most of the action, as always, is remaining further off towards the east. You can see behind me we do have a bit of cloud cover moving into the northern half of the state, but it's just clouds. The little rain, the spots of rain that you see isn't really hitting the ground. For tonight, it will become cloudy. Temperature of 67 expected in the metro area. And then as we take a look across the region, we're in the 50s, 60s. We even have some 70s and 80s as we press further inland. Clear skies in Mecca and in Borrego Springs. But as we head along the coast, we will notice that dense marine layer increase as the night goes on. Temperatures in Oceanside will be diving into the 60s. We're at 67 in Long Beach, 67 degrees tonight in San Diego, 66 Chula Vista. Cooler as we head further inland, but the further east you go, you're actually going to get a little bit warmer. 82 degrees tonight in Mecca, mainly clear skies in the area. Here's a look at what's expected Tuesday. It'll be seasonal across California, but SoCal, well, further inland, that desert going to be very, very warm with triple-digit heat, ample sunshine throughout the day. So the sizzle is on. Let's get right into your extended forecast. Tuesday, clouds will break for sunshine. Temperatures will climb into the lower 80s. As we head towards Wednesday, a little bit cooler, and then the trend of the 70s continues here pretty much through the work week. And even as we kick off the weekend, you can see we're keeping things fairly simple. Partial sunshine throughout the day, an increase in clouds as we head towards the overnight, and that's how we'll be waking up each of the next several mornings. Further inland, well, you can see it is warm out there with highs climbing to 93 Tuesday afternoon. Low clouds, then breaks of sunshine as we head toward the afternoon hour. Similar Wednesday and into Thursday. By Friday, we will have a slight cool down with highs in the mid 80s, 84 degrees on Saturday, turning sunny as we approach the afternoon hour. Over in the mountain, highs will climb to 90 degrees Tuesday afternoon, so very warm. We stay in the upper 80s Wednesday through Thursday. Then we are going to notice cooler air filter on in by Friday. Absolutely gorgeous end of the work week. That tendency continuing here for the start of the weekend. And then over in the desert, where I don't even have to say much, it's going to be sizzling hot Tuesday, Wednesday. Not as warm as we head towards Thursday, but temperatures remaining in the triple digits. KPBS News, Larissa Abreu.
Following up on efforts to pay farm workers more money on longer shifts, Sacramento lawmakers are sending a new bill to Governor Brown calling for the same overtime laws to people who have sow or harvest food as those who pack it and work in other industries. The United Farm Workers Union says AB 1066 would make California the first state to mandate farm workers receive extra pay after 8 hours.
Right now, under current law, we're telling our farm workers, you are different than other workers. You are less than other workers. You are less valued and less valuable than other workers.
Once the bill is delivered to the governor's desk, he has the opportunity to either sign it into law or veto it. Significant changes to the California Public Utility Commission have been moving through the state legislature, anticipating the final week of session, which is this week. Last week, the state Senate passed the first of 3 bills. Lawmakers and Governor Jerry Brown have agreed to add oversight to the change responsibility at the commission. The bill prohibits utilities from lobbying significant judges to oversee their cases. The legislation comes after the state and federal investigations of the commission, including of a former chairman who met overseas with utility executives to discuss a closure of a San Ysidro nuclear plant.
Srinivasan on the next News Hour, the latest in the 2016 presidential campaign on Politics Monday with Amy Walter and Stuart Rothenberg. That's Monday on the PBS News Hour.
Fans are mourning Mexican superstar Juan Gabriela, who died this week at his California home. He performed before a packed crowd in San Diego earlier this month. As a boy, Juan would sing and play his guitar on city buses just across the border. He became one of Latin America's top-selling artists with a star on Hollywood's Walk of Fame. The 66-year-old artist gave his last concert on Friday in Los Angeles. Los Angeles coroner's office says he died of natural causes yesterday. Saying goodbye to the man who introduced us to the world of pure imagination, actor Gene Wilder has died. Associated Press reporter Lori Neff shows us the highlights from his career beyond Willy Wonka's chocolate factory.
Frankenstein. You're putting me on.
He was the star of such comedy classics as Young Frankenstein, Blazing Saddles, and The Producers. Gene Wilder's nephew reveals that the actor and writer died in Stamford, Connecticut earlier this month from complications from Alzheimer's disease. A statement said Wilder had been diagnosed 3 years ago, but kept the condition private so as not to disappoint fans. Wilder started his career on the stage, but he's best known for his movies, especially his collaborations with Mel Brooks. In a tweet, Brooks wrote that Wilder was, quote, one of the truly great talents of our time. Wilder also worked with his close friend Richard Pryor on such films as Silver Streak and Stir Crazy. During the making of the movie Hanky Panky, Wilder fell in love with his co-star Gilda Radner, whom he married in 1984. After Radner died of ovarian cancer in 1989, Wilder spent much of his time promoting cancer research. Wilder is survived by his wife Karen, whom he married in 1991. Gene Wilder was 83. Lori Neff, The Associated Press.
A changing of the guard at Navy Medical Center San Diego tomorrow. Captain Joel Roos is scheduled to succeed Captain Jose Acosta as commander. Acosta, who held his post for 2 years, will become the lead medical officer for the San Diego-based U.S. 3rd Fleet. As the fleet surgeon, he'll be responsible for the medical readiness of the sailors and Marines abroad on the ships, stationed in California, Washington, and Hawaii. Scientists have completed a year-long Mars simulation in Hawaii, where they lived in a dome in near isolation.
3, 2, 1, come on!
6 scientists emerged from the dome Sunday. It's been their home for a year. They conducted research, managed limited resources, and worked to avoid personal conflicts. They could only go outside in a spacesuit.
Lots of knitting was done, but not as much treadmill. No treadmill. So
Yeah, so fortunately we were able to bicycle for our power and exercise, but yeah, it was cold and dark for a while.
NASA funded the study through the University of Hawaii.
A mission to Mars in the close future is realistic. I think the technological and psychological obstacles can be overcome.
The year-long simulation is the second longest of its kind after a mission that lasted 520 days in Russia.
Here's a look at what we're working on tomorrow in the KPBS newsroom. On Morning Edition, the history of dog hole ports, redwood logging ports along the California coast. It tells a story of the shipping industry and the people of the time. And on Midday Edition, it's a cutting-edge, top-of-the-line Navy research vessel. We'll explain how it's about to help us understand more about the ocean, Earth, and our climate. That's tomorrow on KPBS Radio. You can find tonight's stories on our website, kpbs.org/evening edition. Thanks for joining us. Have a wonderful evening.